Today we take a look at VARUN's new M26-1 Pro. This new bike is more of an entry-level bike. Depending on the time that you find this, it could be around $600 to $700. Now this new bike will come with a 500 watt, 750 peak, but there were no torque specs. But from my riding and also testing other bikes, it feels around the 60 Newton meters of torque area, which for 500 watts, that seems about right. And being that this bike is actually pretty light and only coming in at around 62 pounds, that's actually much lighter than other bikes kind of in this same class. So even though it has 500 watts of power, it actually does a pretty good job due to the bike being lighter. Now this bike does have a 48 volt, 10.4 amp hour battery, and they state that you can get around 60 miles. Now this is going to be with a very light rider and also using the pedal assist #1. Now when it comes to normal riding, when I did my test ride today, I ended up using pedal assist #3, 4, and 5, and this ended up only providing about 20 miles, but this was also due to me being 200 pounds with gear, and not to mention there are a lot of hills where I live, not to mention it was also hot. It was about 85 degrees today, so that's also going to play a role in how much battery life and distance you're able to travel when it comes to this bike. Now this bike does ride on a 26-inch diameter tire that is 4 inches wide, so it is considered obviously a fat tire bike. And it also will have an all-terrain tire, which does pretty well in most conditions if you're looking for light off-roading and also paved trails, and not to mention just your everyday riding. It does come with a unique rim that happens to have holes in the center of it. This is to help make it a little bit lighter, as this bike again is pretty light for its class. So it is a little bit odd though, the holes, because it does seem like you might be able to get a little bit more debris in there that could help with a flat, but there is a thick layer that goes all the way around the rim and kind of prevents it from hitting the tube. Now this bike is set up with dual suspension with a set of front forks that are hydraulic, that does have a lockout and is somewhat adjustable, along with a rear shock. That way it's not a hardtail, and it does provide a decent amount of suspension for the normal person for normal riding. I ended up using the stock settings, which I found fine for the type of riding I did on my test rides, and found that it provided plenty of cushion, especially if you don't air up the tires all the way to 30 psi, or that will make it a little bit more of a rigid and jarring ride. Now this bike does come with cable-driven disc brakes on the front and the rear, and a 160mm rotor. Now this is a little bit smaller than I would like to see, but now that's usually on an 80-pound plus bike. Again, weighing over 62 pounds, it actually does pretty well, and I think the brakes are just fine. This bike also comes with a really nice display that's not colored, but is actually really easy to see in all conditions. I could see this out when I was riding in bright and also shaded conditions, and so it's really easy to see how fast you're going and also to check how many miles that you've ridden. It comes with a 3 push button information center, that way you can turn the bike on and off and adjust from pass 1 all the way up to pass 5. And this will come with a 7-speed cassette, which is a Shimano TZ Tourney type derailleur. Now this is a little bit more entry level, but it still does the job and seems to be pretty common in most of these entry level bikes. Now on the 3-button display, if you do hold down the minus button, you will also get the walk assist, which this will help you if you happen to be walking up a hill, and it'll propel the bike at about 1 mile an hour. Now it does come with a twist throttle as well, and also a bell just to indicate to people that you are coming. Now I did find the seat on this actually really comfortable. There is plenty of adjustment as far as your height up and down, or even moving the seat back and forth. And as you can see, that the bike does come with a set of fenders on this. Now it does serve a purpose, as it does help keep a little bit of water that might splash onto your back, but both of these fenders are more of a very loose fit. They're not rigid whatsoever. And as you can see, these things do kind of bounce around a lot, and as you are riding, they would kind of smack the tires if you were kind of on a dirt road, or maybe if you were jumping off curbs, you would hear the actual fender smack against the tire, which is nothing to really be alerted by. But I do see these possibly breaking, or at least being the first things to fail on this bike, as they're not very durable. So this will probably be one of the first things that you'll see get broken or maybe damaged. Now this bike is a little bit portable, so if you did want to fold it and break it down and maybe put it into the back of a truck or maybe your SUV, you can. It is a little bit bigger than some of the other bikes that fold, and once you fold this bike, this is where you will find your battery, which again is a 48 volt and 10.4 amp hours. Now when it comes to riding this bike, when you are on pass #1, this is going to give you about a 7 mile per hour riding speed if you are just using the throttle only. And as you step up to pass 2, it's going to bump you to about 9 miles an hour. Pass 3 will bring you to about 11 to 13 roughly. Pass 4 will get you about 14 to 15 miles an hour roughly. And by the time you hit pass 5, that's where it's going to take you all the way up to your top speed, which for me was around 24 to 25 miles an hour, which is what it is rated for. Now, I did do a speedometer test just to make sure, because some bikes are actually off by a couple miles per hour. This bike actually did a good job at showing its miles per hour hooked up with a GPS on my phone to where it was only really about a half a mile an hour off, which is perfectly acceptable. Now, when it comes to the comfort of this bike and the ergonomics, I'm 5'11", and this is actually not a bad bike for my size. If you're a little bit shorter, it will also do really well. If you're a little bit taller, the cockpit might start to get a little bit tight for you. I think if you're about 6 foot on down, this is a great bike. If you're a little bit taller than that, you could probably still do it depending on how maybe long your legs are or your torso. But I think you might get a little bit tight in the cockpit if you are over 6 foot. And if you're really short, well, you might have a little bit of a hard time getting your leg up and over this. It's not as tall as some bikes, but again, you might want a low frame bike if you are shorter and looking for something easier to get on. And during my test ride, I did find this bike to be enjoyable, especially if you think about the entry price of around $600 to $700. Now, I ended up doing a 20-mile ride on my test just to get an overall comfort feel of this, and it was actually enjoyable to ride. And again, it's only $600 to $700, and with the amount of torque that it has, it doesn't do a bad job at getting you up some of the hills, which it can do up to a 30% incline, which most of the hills I'm doing are less than that. And up a long grade where I go up a quarter-mile hill, it ended up maintaining 6 to 7 miles per hour on the steepest areas and about 8 to 9, which is about roughly what I'll see some of the 750 watt motors do all the way up the hill. Now, being that this bike is more entry level and it is a lower price than several others, I find the suspension to be adequate if you're going to be just using this as more of a kind of a beginner type, if this is your first type of e-bike. If you're looking for something a little bit more aggressive, you may want to spend a little bit more money and look for some other options that have a little bit better suspension, maybe a little bit more power, at least 750 watt or 1000 watt if you're more experienced and looking for a little bit more of a thrill. Now, again, this bike does 25 miles an hour, which is fast enough for most people, but if you are a thrill seeker, you may want to find something that moves up to that 20 to 32 mile an hour. Now, when it comes to pros to this bike, the price is definitely one of the best things. And then the weight. This is actually one of the lighter bikes that I've tested in this size. It's a 26-inch fat tire bike, and even though it's only 500 watt, a lot of them will be 750, have about the same type of battery, and they'll be much heavier, 85 to maybe 90 pounds.
All right, let's see how well I can go up this hill with no power. So pass level 0, nothing helping me, no throttle. See if this thing is geared okay. That way if the battery is low or dies, you're still going to be able to at least make it up some small hills. So far it's not bad, and pedaling with only one hand on the bars. This is much better than some other bikes because, again, it's light. It only weighs 62 pounds, which is much lighter than a lot of other bikes at about 80 or 90. Wow, okay, that's actually not bad. I've had other bikes where I can't make it up that hill. So being that the weight is low, let's see how well it does in other areas. Okay, mild hill, dead stop, and throttle only. Check on the torque. Here we go. So slower, obviously, with a 500 watt motor, 750 peak, but torque on this isn't going to be super high, but it'll still do the job, and I'm about 200 pounds with gears, so not bad.
Now, as far as cons on this bike, well, there's not really a whole lot, to be honest. There's not a whole bunch of frills on it. It does 25 miles an hour. The torque is acceptable. It's not anything exactly going to win any races. Now, if there's any other cons I can think of, it would really be the brakes. I'm a little bit more of an aggressive rider, so I like really good brakes. Now, for me, I found that they did fine if you're riding under normal conditions, but under the more aggressive style, I found that they would heat up quick because they are a smaller rotor, and so warping will probably happen on this bike if you were more aggressive on it. Hence, if you're a little bit more of an experienced rider, you may want to move up to something a little bit different. Overall, for an entry-level bike though, this is not a bad option. And I hope this video helped you out. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below. Then I hope to see you in the next video.